Okay, and welcome to this Componize Insights from Experts series. Welcome, Noz. Thanks for agreeing to join us
M-
for
m-
one of yeah.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right. Basically, I invited you to join us. We started this series off at the Componize Summit, where we talked to experts in the field, from content strategists to vendors, implementation partners, and get them to give us their insights, their tips and tricks, and things to look out for in the world of technical writing. And basically, that goes from the creation all the way to the delivery. In today's session, we're looking at reviews of the future in an omnichannel, multilingual, and increasingly personalized world. Our guest today, as I've just introduced, Noz Urbina from Urbina Consulting. Noz is a globally recognized leader in the field of content and customer experience. He's a pioneer in customer journey mapping and adaptive content modeling for delivering personalized, contextualized, relevant content experiences in any environment. He's a co-founder and program director of the OmnichannelX conference and podcast. So you can pick up a podcast with Noz as well on your favorite podcast readers. Co-author of the book, Content Strategy, Connecting the Dots Between Businesses, between business, brand, and benefits, and he's also a lecturer in a master's program in content strategy at the University of Applied Sciences of Graz, Austria. Welcome.
Thank you, Dipo.
Okay, today, in a world where we've got CCMSs, cloud storage, shared reviews, collaborative reviews, all of these terms have come across over the last 15 to 20 years. But one of the promise that we were supposed to be that was supposed to be taken care of by all these tools, the bevy of tools and methodologies, is what are the channels, what are the challenges surrounding reviews? How do we get this increasing volume of content reviewed as efficiently as we used to when we print them out on a piece of paper and someone would just note on it with a little red pen? So why is it so difficult to review in general content, especially in regulatory legal fields? What are the challenges that we've got, ahead of us? And why is it that we're still using some of these old processes of, sending a PDF off by email to someone and then eventually having to collate all the different review comments manually? Why are we still in the dark ages when it comes to reviewing with these new tools we've got? While we still in copy paste non-structured environments, that fear of moving from that into structured componentized content, there's still quite a lot of fear. So what are the ways that we can sort of help alleviate some of these issues, these problems we have, especially around content reviews? So we'll be having a discussion. Noz will be giving us pointers, tips and tricks, and general advice. So I've got a series of questions. We'll go through them and feel free to contact us. Noz, we'll have the details at the end of this recording. Feel free to contact us for any advice, any counseling you might need. We're there for you, and that's why we have these series going out. I'll also be doing resume articles and all of that. So follow me on LinkedIn, follow Noz on LinkedIn as well, and see what else we're coming up with. Okay, so let's dive right in. What are the challenges around content review in general? Let's start off with that.
So, content review, in generally speaking, it's difficult for many reasons. Most people simply don't want to do it. It's a painful chore task. It's there's creation, there's design, there's brainstorming, there's all these fun things that happen with content, and reviewing it is like the most boring one. Reading over stuff that's already done, checking for errors, and so on. So there's the fundamental barrier of it's making a not attractive task livable, even maybe I'm not going to say fun, but how can we make it as low friction as possible so we reduce some of that pushback? Then there's also there's so many types of review that are needed. There's the editorial review, like from an editorial strategy point of view. There's content accuracy review. There's litigation and legal review, regulatory, and so there's so many types. And then there's also visual. Does it look right? Is it up to the current brand? Is it properly represented? There's so many different things you need to check for to see if X piece of content is up to all of the various standards that a piece of content is actually being measured against. So I think that's the fundamental, is so many things we're looking for, so many different people need to look at it, and none of them want to in the first place. I think that's the biggest deal. And that when you have complex content, then the job itself becomes a lot more complex, which I think we're going to dig into in the rest of the interview.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. So that's like, great intro into it, the complexity, the different types of reviews. I mean, like you listed, 5, 6 different types of reviews, looking for different things each time and by different people. So what are the approaches people are taking today, and why is it so difficult? What are you seeing out there as a consultant?
So what people are doing is, as you mentioned in the intro, we are still like sending out a PDF or a Word document and getting back track changes or comments that have to be collated by whomever the review owner is, which doesn't facilitate a lot of communication between reviewers. And whenever you're duplicating content, I think most of the listeners of this on this session will know, whenever you're duplicating content, then you have this issue of having to deal with the same thing multiple times. Everybody catches the same thing, and you have to kind of check whether they're actually seeing the same thing or whether they're seeing different things, or just process 6 comments on the same thing or 10 comments on the same thing. It creates a bottleneck at the review owner, which is also often the content creator. So it makes the content creator's job more difficult. These days, we're also seeing things like Word or Google Docs, where you're putting up source content and people are putting in track changes or comments right there at the same time, which is a lot better. There is some difficulty in this, in that they're not like the comment conversation capabilities between reviewers are limited. It amazes me that in 2022 is actually so poor, the discussion management for the review. So when a review gets complicated for complex content, then having a long discussion in the review comments starts to become a really unreadable mess. Then fundamentally, there's I think this is, maybe I should have addressed this in the first question. Fundamentally, there's a problem with it. If you're using a tool like that, then it's disconnected from every other document. When we say review, what is it that we are reviewing? There's if you're in the component content world, you're reviewing a component or a collection of components. You could be reviewing them in isolation. You could be reviewing a collection of components, which could then later be reused in various deliverables or documents. So if you're using something like Word or Google Docs, that's usually like the final thing that you've put out a review copy of, that they're reviewing that instance, that collection of those sections or topics, depending on your terminology. So that instance of that collection, people doing all the review there. The fact is that those topics, both in the sense of topics as in reusable components, but also in the sense of the subjects that are being talked about in that document, could be talked about in others, or even reused in others, if you have the capability to actually reuse contents across documents. So when you're reviewing in a Word or Google Docs, you're disconnecting that review from the life of those pieces, the subject matter areas, or those actual pieces of content when they are reused or when they are discussed in other documents. And so this is this is really difficult in terms of a review system. The fact that a review job seems to become, it's kind of spikes off of the content lifecycle, becomes its own little thing, and doesn't properly connect back into the rest of the lifecycle of all of ththose pieces of content you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing out in the field is that I'm still even seeing people, out of desperation to get all this done in a timely manner, sit down and open up documents in a meeting and go through them as a group, line by line.
Yeah.
Because just out of no other way to kind of shortcut all of the communication necessary. So they actually book meetings and say, okay, on this date, on this 2 hours or this afternoon, we're going to go through the X document. That works for documents of a certain size. It's never going to work for multi-hundred page documents. But for smaller documents, high value documents, I'm still seeing that.
Feature updates and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then source content reviews. So if you do have a component content management system that can do reusable blocks of content, there are review tools which are attached to those, which are usually proprietary for that system, so that system offers a review interface into it, which is fine, and that works for the content that's in that system. But what I'm often seeing is it doesn't fix that fundamental challenge that I'm talking about of connecting that review job to the overall life cycle of the content.
All right. So, I mean, you mentioned reuse as one of the issues that we face, and when we go into content as components, you mentioned the word topic. Let's quickly just explain to the audience. A topic is maybe, it could be a paragraph, it could be a whole page, but basically it talks about just one subject. And when you get into components, you create components of these topics, and then you can reuse them in other areas. So for example, you create your manual and you've got your forward. Well, maybe the forward is always a description of the company. Well, you just write it once and you can reuse it in all of your manuals because you've written it once, everyone's approved it. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about topics and reuse. So what are the challenges specific to reuse when we start looking at, all these different components and all that sort of stuff?
Well, it kind of, in a way, it helps in one area enormously, and then it harms in another. So the incredible benefit of reuse is, of course, that, and I've seen this in many, many, many projects in the past 2 decades, is that if you can reuse and you do catch a bug, like a content bug, an issue in a piece of content, then that can be fixed that one time, and then that can be implemented in every place that the content is reused. So it could be hundreds of times. If you're talking about things like legal disclaimers, or the setup of preparing your environment for doing a certain task, and that's the same for most of the tasks in your system. It could be hundreds of documents, hundreds of incarnations of documents that get suddenly fixed at once. And then when you multiply that out for the multiple formats that content might appear in, and then the multiple regional languages, then you could be talking, and I am serious, up to thousands of outputs all get suddenly fixed when you catch this one error. So reuse is magically powerful in terms of leveraging the power of a review to improve huge chunks of your content. On the other side of that, once we have the power of reuse, we start to do things like we want to create different versions. So we want to personalize content, which is creating a flavor of a document or deliverable for a particular persona or even individual customer. But the idea is that it's tailored to them. It's not everything you have on that topic, it's what you think that person will care about. So we often see variants of content going out for different roles or different segments of the market. Then there's also localization. So different topics being reused for different markets. And at a higher level than personalization, we have segmentation. So, very large chunks of the market, which can be defined however your business wants to define them. And then we will create different flavors by reusing some pieces for all audiences, and then others for only certain audiences, et cetera. And then, as I was just saying, when you have multiple channels and formats, in the omnichannel world, you're releasing content for a whole swath of different potential formats. So the impact of this whole thing is multiplied. So, and if you are creating all these different kind of versions and flavors, you're also multiplying the reviews, because especially for a regulated industry, the whole process, the whole document control process and flow was built for paper documents. So you do the thing, you send it out, they review it, whoever needs to review it within the chain approves it, and then it goes out. But with reuse and different flavors for all those different scenarios that I talked about, personalization, localization, audience segmentation, omnichannel, then how do you do that? Instead of sending one document out for review, as I said, if you multiply this out by all these different flavors, suddenly you could be talking about you're putting dozens or hundreds of review jobs through the pipe. So there is an enormous challenge when we get through a review system that we are multiplying the number of potential reviews and then the ask on all the different types of reviewers. If you get it wrong, then the risks are all the things that we're trying to avoid. The financial risk, the litigation risk. Things can go off with messaging that's off brand, safety issues. If you don't get the review right, then it's quite a significant big deal.
Right. And those are especially when you're looking at content reuse. You mentioned a term over there. I'd like you to define, what is omnichannel?
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm omnichannel is my bread and butter. Anyone who follows me will hear me talking about it constantly. So we use the term multichannel and multichannel publishing back in the day. The difference between omnichannel and multichannel is an internal efficiency gain. It is something that's been, it's the fact that I can take a piece of content and push it out in multiple formats and then put it out on my multiple channels. Omnichannel is where you've actually looked at how all of the puzzle pieces fit together for the users involved, and you've optimized how you're using the channels and what content you're putting out on what channels so that the whole thing works better for the user. So we have now, you'll have seen many multi-device experiences where you're a very simple one. Let's talk about review. I'm reviewing a document. I've got to digitally sign it. I click the digitally sign. It pops up something on my phone. I use a touch screen on my phone to do my signature. I hit submit, and then it comes back up on my laptop or my desktop screen. When we use our phones to log into our smart TVs, when we use the ability of one device, of one channel, for example, social is very, very good at connecting people, giving short overviews, and getting people interested in a certain topic, and then you connect that to a deeper content, which may be on your website, and then even deeper content, which may be on a knowledge base. So this thinking of this entire process and saying, how does the human being experience all this together? That's omnichannel, as opposed to how do I save money by pushing my stuff out on multiple channels, which was the multi-channel mentality. Excellent.
Thanks very much. And let's move on. What are the missing parts of reviews? When we're looking at all these different processes and all of that, what is still missing?
So when we talked about reuse, we talked about omnichannel and personalization. When you put content in one context for a review, or you try to review it completely out of context, like saying, okay, here's a bunch of sections which are going to be reused. You don't know where, but you're going to review them. That's a challenge for the reviewer. So we have to try to better balance how we do present context to the reviewer. So for example, if we do have a system that is going to be creating all these different flavors, can we put that in the reviewer's hand? Can we show them, this is a body of content that could be expressed out in these 10 different ways. Make sure that you've checked all these 10 flavors before you submit this review back, and look at them, see, make sure that the kind of give them a visual scan and then do a line by line at the right times to make sure you've checked all the different ways this could go out. That's a challenge because it's a complex concept if people don't understand the idea of a dynamically built document, and if they don't understand the idea of reuse and personalization. We're doing this balancing act between the making things simple to make this unpleasant task go fluidly, and the simple fact that we want to do more complex content, more personalized and omnichannel, which creates more complex content reviews. So we need to build the interfaces that make that complexity simple.
Yeah, I mean, you perfect example I could give would be, for example, a safety message. And so a safety message may be concerning electricity, and it says, careful, do not touch this wire because, you will receive an electric shock. Now, in certain cases, that could be considered a caution, i.e. a caution is harm to body. In another case, it could be a danger, i.e. risk of death. Now, depending, you could use this same message and maybe in the machine, in the 3 different areas where you want to use this, it was always maybe 200 volts. And so it was always a caution. However, upgrade the machine, and the third part of the machine now has some sort of capacitor that ups the voltage to, like, we're at 500, 600 volts. We're at high voltage. You've been using this same message in the 3. However, now the same message in one context is a danger. If you go ahead with, like, well, you've reviewed the content, you've said this message is okay. Well, in that third context, it no longer applies. And so the reviewer should be able to say, like, okay, well, I'm reviewing this thing, but give me the context. And maybe just at a touch of a button, I can switch it and say, like, I'm looking at this manual, or I'm looking at this feature, or I'm looking at, and so on, and ease that strain on the reviewers, ease the cognitive load on the reviewer. And that way you also then maybe start getting acceptance from regulatory bodies in that, well, they're asking for output reviews, because then it's always set in context. When you start going into CCMS type componentized content, where you're looking at the source content, what we want to move to is approving source content. However, because of that aspect of different contexts, reuse and all of that, we need to be able to incorporate that into your review tools so that you're able to say that, okay, well, I'm accepting it in this particular context. However, if you want me to accept it in another context for another document, send it to me again with that context. Those sort of things need to be done, basically.
Or provide both contexts and let me switch in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a great example. I have another one where we were doing legal review, and they were doing copyright statements inside the content. And so sometimes if you say something about a particular work, there's certain rules about what kind of copyright marks that needs, and whether the copyright is approved, and you have a license to say what you're saying. And so it was a legal review, but these documents were huge. They're like 100 pages, but the lawyer only cares about potentially copyright infringing statements. So we had this thing where you could see all of the potential statements that had been marked as, like, for copyright review, and the lawyer would literally just see that. So they would get like a spreadsheet of saying, these are the statements that have been made that you need to review. And if they can review them, they would just check them off. If they said, wait a minute, how and where was this said? Then you actually had what was called a context zoom. So you could say, I want to zoom out one level, and then the surrounding paragraphs would appear. Yeah. And so you could see the whole paragraph in which that was the statement was made. And if they went, oh, wait a minute, no, I still don't, I need more on this one, they could step out even more, and you would see the entire section of where that statement was made. So the lawyer had the proper context.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's there has to be a lot, this idea of context, it extends beyond, so you gave a good one about the electrics one, where the changes in the usage context, changes in products can change the meaning of the content and what the review statements are. In general, what we're kind of crying out for is something that connects the content from a subject matter point of view to the overall life cycle. So I see us, when we're going forward, being able to look at this kind of thing where we have a particular context and say, well, we get lots and lots of review comments on this particular feature. And every time it goes for a review, we get lots of comments. Rather than that going back to the just to the content creator so that they can resolve them, can we start to report on dozens of reviews across even teams and departments? So this feature is reused in tons of products and tons of industries, and hundreds of times it's been mentioned across these different documents. And every time it sparks off a big debate. If there are always 20 comments going back and forth whenever we talk about this feature, can we start to get visibility on that? Where are the points of common confusion? Where are the points of common discussion? And it's a very simple statistic analysis saying, okay, every time we use this topic, or every time we mention this term, or every time we mention this feature, it sparks off the lots of debate. What's going on here? Bringing that not to the author, but to the product manager, and saying, what the hell's wrong with this feature? Exposing the business intelligence of what's happening in reviews and connecting that context and exposing it to the different people in the business so that they can understand it, and make the not the immediate, I want to get this document out the door changes, but the deep cuts and the deep changes that will really avoid that kind of issue in the future.
Yeah. So basically bringing that historical argument that's always been on there, and the next time the SME sees it and clicks on it, and just before they can start off the argument again, they're able to see that context in that, oh, well, we debated this, the last time, product manager, head of whatever, they all agreed that this is why we're saying this particular statement. And then, well, that prevents that new comment opening up that, that issue again for the content writer.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good additional application of the same thing. But actually, what I was talking about was if the feature has been reviewed in many contexts, and each time that there's a discussion, show me a report of all the sections which have discussions that went over 20 comments. So give me like a heat map of problems within the content, and then let me drill into that so that I can go look and say, well, is it the product? Is it the content? Is it the content structure? Is what's going on here? So not necessarily from a review job to review job context, but from a 1,000-foot view as someone who's responsible for this body of content or for this product line. What is going on? Where are the hotspots of discussion? There's all sorts of things that we could do in terms of that, and expanding that out to the field, integrating this after you've actually published the content. So we're not just talking about internal review, but give me a review platform that handles, the likes and the comments and the things that are coming back when it's out there on the web or out on the knowledge portal. Bring in those statistics and allow me to do the analysis to say these topic areas get lots of thumbs down, these topic areas get lots of thumbs up, and start to do the kind of the high level analysis that lets me find out where things are going wrong in the overall system. I think that's where the reviews of the future are going. And that's way beyond like having a good review interface. That's having a good data layer underneath it that understands the different topics. It's doing meta-analysis, it's doing text analysis to be able to bring you the categories and the areas and the subjects that are kicking off reviews, both internally and externally in your business. It's a completely different kind of mindset than what we're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to that next question. What's the market crying out for in terms of like, tools and processes, and how can we also, when you're in a regulated environment, secure the audit trail?
Yes, of course. So I think what we're crying out for top of priority is this fundamental concept of reconnecting the individual review job with all the data of previous reviews. What has happened in other times this section was reviewed, other times this subject was talked about, which is not the content, it's the metadata. So I know it's about this feature, I know it's about safety, I know it's about, for example, accessibility, I know it's about getting started. Where are the hotspots in terms of the categories of content for which products, for which markets, and so on. And that data layer underneath that connects the dots between what's been happening in multiple reviews. I think that's what really turns review from just a chore so we can get it out the door to something that delivers real return on investment, that we're leveraging the knowledge of the reviewers and the public rather than just saying, okay, this document ticks all the boxes, it can go now. So I think that's the number one fundamental paradigm shift that I think review is screaming out for.
Right. And like, the challenges of the future, well, what about when you add translation to the mix of content that needs reviewing?
Yeah, so translation, it's again, reuse is great and painful translation. I remember talking to translation vendors who were saying translators love it when you just send them exactly the one sentence that they need to translate, and they just translate it and they put it back in the system, and the translation memory makes the magic happen. And then I spoke to actual translators and they're like, I hate that because that's not how language works. Language doesn't work with individual sentences flying around out of context. That's a very English-centric thing to say, because if you speak any other languages, you know that the gender and the number, plurality, etc., it will affect it. And so, like, if you had the sentence "it's great," or the items are now ready for processing, they're complete grammatic sentences, but you cannot translate them out of context. You need to have the context available. So when we're working with things like translation strings and translation memory, it's another way of saying, how do I properly bring context to the translator while still feeding this machine that does this translation automation and the things that modern translation wants to do. I think that's the big challenge of the future. Then there's this technical concept and selling this idea. So I've talked about a very significant paradigm shift in how we do review. And when you have a paradigm shift, you have to market it. You have to make people understand it. You have to make people want to do it. You have to start to push your vendors so that they'll go above and beyond. So there's people, we're at the very earliest stage of this. So we need people to understand what's possible and start to get market demand going so that the tools will start to become available for us.
Excellent. And so we're coming up towards the end of this. We said we'd try and keep it short, impactful, so as people don't doze off halfway through it. Let's list some quick wins and some long-term goals. What are the things we can do, or what are the things we should expect in the short term and in the long term?
So if you are doing reuse, or if you are doing review in general, doing a process audit and analysis of how things are going today. Just actually walk through the process, talk to a representative set of reviewers, find out what's happening, find out everywhere where feedback is collected, and get that together. Get a big picture of how it's going today and understand that picture. Find out what the reviewers' pain points are, and start to assess, can we do different categories of review? Can we do different levels of review? So you can talk to regulators, and I've seen this, talk to regulators, talk to legal, and say, listen, we want to do review in this new way. It's not the old way. And immediately they kind of go, whoa. So we've seen times when you can create a shortcut review. So if we are making only these kinds of changes, then we can do a short review, not have to loop in everybody, or not have to do it, review the end formatted version of everything. We can just review the content and push through the corrections. Whereas if we're changing something that's potentially legal or safety, then we have to do a different level of review. And before you kick off any discussion with anyone, start to find out what the current horror stories are. I always tell people, when you find something that's gone bad, that's not a problem, it's a gold mine. Because that, you can take that example and go, look, we got sued, or we lost this customer, or we had this horrible press release. Find out when something went bad, that the people who are actually controlling the budget will stop and take notice, and cradle those examples and bring them and say, this is what's going wrong, or the sheer waste. How many hours of SME time could you recover if you improve review times by 10%? Yeah, gather that up, and already that will be extremely useful. For the longer term, see if you could start to collate external data like field and public data back into your review process, so that you're not just doing pre-release and then pre-release again. So every time you publish, you do kind of the internal reviews, but actually look what happens beyond that, and see if you can start to take in that end data. See what's happening in support. Talk to the support people. Where are they seeing the key issues? And that will drive your review strategy. Simplify the review tools. They have to be really easy. These tools that we're pushing out, but to make something easy requires a lot of design, a lot of work. It has to be visually simpler. You have to make all this complexity that I've been discussing into an easy interface, and be more specific with the vendors. So talk about what you want strategically from the review process, and bring that to the vendors and say, these are my business problems, and how can we solve these? And then, as I was talking earlier, drive toward this idea that it's not about the singular review job, but it's about the capturing review knowledge and finding content pain points during review jobs, during dozens or hundreds of thousands of review jobs, bringing all that together. And things like AI, text analysis, meta-analysis, and will allow you to auto-detect things like long discussions, and then correlate that with particular topics, areas, regions, features, and then flag that both to the content owners and to the product owners. The idea that all this, rather than giving you, okay, I've done a review job, give me a dashboard of what's happening across my reviews. I think that's where we should all be driving.
All right, excellent. And I mean, I talked to you about our new review tool. Componize is working on a review tool. We promised to bring it out this year, but we also promised not to bring out a tool that we just want to sell, but one that actually works. And during Convex in Arizona, Convex North America, last spring, we had a test kitchen, and we showed that to different possible users, but also technical writers, and ask them, okay, what are the things that, that we're missing here, and as such, we've pushed the date back, so it's not yet ready. We want this thing to to respond. We have our ideas. I've got 14 years in med tech or technical writing in medical devices. However, just my opinion does not mean I understand everybody else and all the different SMEs. So we're getting them to give us that feedback, and little by little we're pushing out and improving on the actual tool. Keep it simple, but also this knowledge graphs that you mentioned, being able to trace everything that's happened, and this heat maps of particular issues, that's something that I think that we'll start working on. Probably not being the first version, but it is something that these are points that we just need to keep coming back. And I'm talking to you out there listening to us, talk to the vendors and tell them what it is you want. I can remember how hard it was, but we had a very helpful, customer relations manager with the CCMS that I was using where I used to work. And they would come in and listen and say, okay, well, we promise, and it's going to be in how are the hot fix and so on. There's still a few features that we're waiting for with them. To talk to your vendors, make sure that they're listening to you and they're bringing back, giving you responses to the issues that you're experiencing. Keep banging that drum. You want to keep advocating with your partners, your tool vendors, but also the implementation consultants. Who was it that helped you build your content strategy? Do you have an insider content strategist? What are your IAs doing? Your information architects? Keep coming back and pinpointing what the issues are, how you can improve it. Re-examine the process and map it out and show it to everybody. All the actors must be able to take a look and be able to step back and see that big picture in order for the process to improve. If everyone keeps looking at the elephant's tail and describing that is what an elephant is, it's hairy, it's skinny, it's long, and the other person is describing the leg because it's just touching the leg and it's a big, thick, you will never be able to step back and take a look at an elephant is an animal with 4 legs, a tail, a trunk, and so on and so forth. So do that with the whole process. Take that step back, get everyone's opinion in it, put all those opinions together, and then come out with what are the possible solutions, what are the things we need to make sure our vendors are giving us, what are the things our implementation partners must give us. So I think we've pretty much come to the end of our interview. Thank you very much. I'll do a resume of this interview. I send those out after we've released the video. Give me a few a few weeks, months sometimes to work on a summary key points. I'll put that out as well. So follow me, follow Noz. Take a look out for when these articles come out. And we'll be doing lots more stuff together as well, I hope. You should be at Lavacon later on this year. We'll be inviting you to any other webinars and things that we have with Componize.
Absolutely. And of course, I organize my own conference, the Omnichannel conference, where we discuss specifically the challenges that having all these channels and being customer-centric across multiple channels presents. So you're going to hear more about that probably in the next couple months. That's in at summertime in Amsterdam. We're going back to live this year. So excellent. Please do check us out. OmnichannelX.digital, not .com, .digital.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Noz. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope loads of you all out there, been able to pick up some great tips. Contact us on the various social channels out there, and we'll be able to talk with you, come back and discuss some more. Let us know also if there's any particular topics you'd like us to talk about. If you want to see more of Noz and I talking, giving you tips and tricks, drop us a line and we'll maybe set something up for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.